Francisco Franco, undoubtedly one of the most controversial figures in Spanish history. For some, he's hailed as a liberator, a hero who fought against the communist threat, while for others, he was nothing but a fascist dictator who collaborated with Hitler. For others still, he was a symbol of traditionalism and defender of Catholicism, during a period in which these two things were under constant attacks from their political enemies. J.R.R. Tolkien, as a man with both strong traditionalist and Catholic beliefs, and who lived during the same period, naturally had opinions regarding the events that unfolded in Spain. These opinions may upset or satisfy you depending on your own beliefs, but I will try my best to represent Tolkien's views regardless and as accurately as possible. In order to do that, however, let us go back to April of 1931. Following continued political instability and polarization, economic hardship, and personal unpopularity, King Alfonso XIII of Spain is deposed, and the Second Spanish Republic is swiftly proclaimed. Despite this, however, the deep ideological discord that divided large parts of the Spanish population were not healed. Instead, the new Republican government's largely progressive and secular reforms aimed at the Catholic Church, alongside perceived inactivity at certain instances of political violence, sparked a significant wave of discontent from among Spain's traditionalists and Catholics, many of which were already upset from the deposition of the previous king, or who wanted to install their own claimant to the Spanish throne. In short, the political situation in Spain was deteriorating day by day, and within a climate in which the international community oversaw an increase in radicalism from across the political spectrum. In 1933, conservative parties were able to win the Spanish general elections, which, shortly thereafter, contributed to attempts at insurrection conducted by anarchist and communist forces respectively. In fact, the uprisings that occurred in 1934 specifically were vital in shaping the public perception of those political groups, especially from across the right and internationally. The mass destruction of churches and convents, the murdering of clergy and civilians were just some of the things that newspapers spread across Spain and, most importantly, England. Naturally, simultaneously, unfair treatment and crimes were also committed against leftist individuals, although because of the scale and the lack of concentration of the mistreatment, in combination with the admittedly lack of sympathy, comparatively at least, the emotional effect was not the same, and especially in traditionally anti-leftist societies. Regardless, the important thing to remember from all of this is that polarization led to instability, and instability to violence, which in turn was aimed towards the things that Tolkien was very passionate about, primarily his Catholic faith, largely targeted by political groups that Tolkien as a traditionalist already disliked with intensity. In this context, following a leftist victory in the 1936 elections, certain segments from amongst the officer corps of the Spanish armed forces immediately turned to organize a coup and overthrow the government. In July of the same year, with a certain Francisco Franco participating, the plans of the rebel officers unfolded and large parts of the Spanish mainland, mainly in the west, were taken over. The legitimate Republican government was now limited to the eastern part of the country, and within the chaos that ensued from the military takeover, dozens of leftist groups pursued their own goals and policies that were often aimed against the government as well, with the anarchists serving as a notable example. In this period of chaos, Spain experienced a breakdown of the rule of law, and in such an environment, violence was only exacerbated. The rebels, or the so-called nationalists, though they too had their ideological differences, largely marketed themselves as the defenders of old Spain, of Catholicism and Christian civilization in general against the Red Threat. Their opponents, in contrast, were the liberators of the workers that wished to rid the people of their oppressors, and they were, importantly, supported openly by the USSR, both materially and diplomatically. Within this climate, Franco was appointed as Generalissimo of the nationalist forces, and with his increased popularity due to his military victories and reputation, Franco soon declared himself Caudillo, an equivalent to Führer, and was later recognized as head of the new Spanish state. With the assistance of both Hitler and Mussolini, as well as the covert support of the Western Allies, in combination with disorganization on the Republican side that led to a number of failed military operations, culminated to the defeat of Republican forces by 1939 and the establishment of Franco's Spanish state, with himself at the top. During the brutal Civil War, which lasted from 1936 to 1939, at least 500,000 Spaniards lay dead, tens of thousands massacred under unspeakable circumstances or perished in internment camps, with violence being brutal on both sides. Franco, especially as leader of his fascist Falangist movement, silenced all political opposition and worked hard at erasing any remains of leftism from Spanish soil, often violently. After all of this, what did Tolkien think of him? J.R.R. Tolkien's opinions on Franco were simultaneously complex but also simple. On the one hand, Tolkien was vehemently opposed to communism and the Soviet Union, mainly due to their antagonism to his faith. With this understanding, Tolkien's view, alongside a large part of the British ruling class, was, at minimum, positively inclined towards Franco, what he represented, and the principle of what he pursued, as a fight against the so-called Red Menace. In addition to this, Tolkien, you may be surprised to know, had a deep connection to Spanish Catholicism especially. The man who raised him following the death of his mother was Father Francis Morgan, a Spanish-born Catholic priest. This man, whom he had loved so much, came from the very group that he felt was under attack in Spain at the hands of the Republicans, both before and during the Civil War. Father Francis would write to Tolkien regularly regarding what was happening in Spain, painting a clear picture to the professor that, though perhaps one-sided, terrified him completely. A picture that led him towards further anti-communism and more radical support towards measures taken in the defense of the Catholic faith. In letter 83 to his son Christopher, written in 1944, years into Franco's rule and still within the Second World War, Tolkien even criticizes his friend C.S. Lewis for his strong opposition to Franco. In the letter, he discusses meeting the South African poet Roy Campbell, a Catholic convert who had volunteered to fight for Franco during the war, and a man that his friend Lewis seemed to dislike, though Tolkien disagreed. C.S. Lewis's reactions were odd. Nothing is greater tribute to Red propaganda than the fact that he, who knows they are in all other subjects liars and traducers, believes all that is said against Franco, and nothing that is said for him. Even Churchill's open speech in Parliament left him unshaken. But hatred of our church is, after all, the real only final foundation of the Church of England, so deep laid that it remains even when all the superstructure seems removed. Yet, if a Lutheran is put in jail, he is up in arms, but if Catholic priests are slaughtered, he disbelieves it, and I dare say, really thinks they asked for it. As you can see, Tolkien's main view of Franco is that he is a supporter and defender of the besieged at the hands of the Reds, Catholic Church. In this sense, in combination with his personal connection to Spain and what he perceives to be the savage and murderous behavior of the leftists against the Catholic faithful, J.R.R. Tolkien undoubtedly was a supporter of Francisco Franco. Beyond this, on a personal level, another reason why Tolkien may have been more positively inclined towards a Catholic movement such as Franco's, whose purpose was to stand in opposition to everything considered anti-Catholic, must have been the professor's own experience as an English Catholic to begin with, in the largely Protestant United Kingdom. With Catholics being harassed, stripped of opportunities, targeted, and even put to death for centuries, and himself perhaps feeling as an outsider at times due to his faith, Tolkien must have felt considerably more sympathy to the story of Catholics being massacred at the hands of communists that he already hated in the first place. Perhaps because of this, he may have even been more prone to disbelieve that these Catholic defenders committed any crimes against the Republicans, and that the godless Red propaganda was at work. I do think, however, that the lack of any real outright vocal support, especially as the Francoist regime continued, must indicate some reservation on the part of Tolkien regarding the regime's morality and right to exist. You could argue that he may have feared being misrepresented as a fascist by the media, though from my experience in researching J.R.R. Tolkien, the man did not particularly care about not voicing his opinions to appeal to others. This brings me to the second part of the matter. While Tolkien may have supported Franco as a champion of Catholicism, what we know of his political beliefs paint a more nuanced picture as to the extent of his support. J.R.R. Tolkien himself, in Letter 52, claimed that he leaned more and more to anarchy, or unconstitutional monarchy, on a philosophical level and not as understood in a leftist context. What this means is that Tolkien was opposed to what we would describe as a big state, and especially the totalitarian fascist regimes that were established in the years leading to the Second World War. He was opposed to the existence of a government telling people what to do, and against any authority that could infringe upon the freedom of individuals. Moreover, in Letter 52 again, he is noted for his view that government and the political entity that is the state should under no circumstances be connected to the idea of the people, as it would be incredibly wrong and even dangerous. This, as you can imagine, was precisely what these authoritarian nationalist regimes, like Franco's, were doing, regardless of your beliefs or if you think this was right or wrong. As I have covered before, a good example of Tolkien's ideal society must have been a traditional and autonomous country like the Shire, ruled by a benevolent and not oppressing king like Aragorn, whose purpose was to simply ensure the liberty of his people. With that said, it would be contradictory then for the professor to support, on a political or ideological level at least, a regime like Franco's, as its traits were in line with the totalitarian fascist states that maintained a one-party system, control of the press and freedom of expression, as well as considerable political suppression. In addition to this, Tolkien remained open about his hate of the Nazis in Germany, as well as their anti-Semitism and treatment of the Jews, a group also persecuted by Franco's regime, a regime openly supported by the Nazis, regardless of the distrust between them. In the end, as you can see, Tolkien did support Franco, and during the Civil War, he wished for his forces to be victorious against the leftists. This support, however, extended only within the bounds of what the professor perceived to be the protection of the Catholic faith and anti-communism, and not on a deeper ideological level. Ideological as in he did not agree with how Franco thought an ideal state should function, how an economy should be managed, or how political opponents should be treated. Moreover, considering he followed the events of the war particularly closely, and taking into account his quote regarding C.S. Lewis, Tolkien must have heard of the atrocities committed by both sides, but was likely more prone to disbelieve those committed by Franco, while putting more emphasis on those that targeted that which he loved most. Nonetheless, due to a lack of sources, it should be noted that it is unknown how the professor's views regarding Francisco Franco may have evolved as emotions cooled, more information became available, and he himself grew older. Just something to keep in mind. A massive thank you to my channel members, and thank you very much for watching.